When I stepped through the gold-trimmed doors of the Langford Legacy Gala, the scent of money hit me before the perfume did. Everything sparkled from the chandelier above to the rows of sequined dresses moving like waves beneath it. I stood still for a second, just long enough to absorb the absurd contrast between this place and the town I'd left at sunrise. I was the only one here in a dress that didn't whisper a designer's name when I moved. Black Clean Simple bought second-hand and ironed in a hotel bathroom. My boots were scuffed at the toes. My hands had cuts and calluses from the last job site I supervised. I'd put my hair in a loose bun. I wore no jewelry, no ring, no mask. My name is Sienna Langford, and to them that last name always came with an asterisk. My mother Miriam had been the Langford daughter who walked away from a trust fund and never got invited back. She raised me in a Vermont farmhouse with tools, ethics, and stories of a family that once told her she'd die poor and forgotten. I was here to remind them that forgetting doesn't always mean erasing. Sienna? I turned at the sound of the voice. Bryce. My cousin stood by the bar, holding a whiskey tumbler like it was a royal scepter. He wore a smug little smile that hadn't changed since we were kids. Didn't think we'd see you here, he added his gaze, moving from my boots to my plain dress with deliberate slowness. You mean you hoped I replied? He laughed too loud, drawing attention. Still got that Vermont fire in you, huh? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Always. As I moved past him, I could feel the stares relatives and socialites trying to remember who I was. Some knew, some didn't. But all of them assumed the same thing: she doesn't belong. The centerpiece of the gala was a scaled model of the Bellevue warehouse, Langford Properties' latest target. It was a hulking structure of brick and iron that had stood abandoned for over a decade. They wanted to flatten it, turn it into glass condos and boutique stores. Another feather in the family's golden cap. I made my way to the model, sipping club soda and listening. Uncle Richard stood beside it, droning on about prime location and limited resistance from the Historical Commission. My cousins nodded like bobbleheads. Excuse me, I said, my voice calm but firm. What's the plan for existing businesses on that block? Richard turned. It took him a full beat to recognize me. Sienna. You're asking about the businesses? Yeah. The Co-op grocery, the daycare center, and the Haitian bakery that's been open since 1982. They'll be relocated. Compensated. How much compensation? I asked market rate. That won't cover their losses. He sighed. This isn't a charity, Sienna. No, I said, setting my glass down. It's not. But it could be a legacy. Bryce stifled a laugh behind me. You planning to buy the building yourself? I didn't answer. Come on, he pushed. You think you're gonna waltz in here in your garage boots and outbid the Langfords? No, I said slowly. I think I already did. His smile faltered. I looked around the room, catching Eleanor Langford's eye, my grandmother matriarch of the empire. She narrowed her gaze, suddenly interested. I turned back to the model and said quietly, sometimes the stray knows exactly where to bite. Then I walked away, before anyone could ask what I meant. They didn't know I already had the papers. They didn't know I'd spent 2 years planning this moment. And they sure as hell didn't know I wasn't there for their approval. I was there to watch them blink when the lights changed. The cocktail hour began with the usual parade of flutes, forced laughter, and self-congratulation. I kept to the edge of the ballroom, sipping sparkling water and dodging small talk. My thrifted black dress clung modestly to my frame, no shimmer, no label. I knew exactly what I looked like to them, an unremarkable outsider who wandered in from the service entrance. I felt it before I heard it, the buzz of recognition, then dismissal. Well, look who showed up after all, slurred a voice behind me. I turned. Dean Langford, my cousin by blood, stranger by choice. He was already red in the face, his tie loosened like a man too used to his own comfort. You're the small-town mechanic's kid, right? He said with a grin swaying slightly. Bet you fixed a tractor on your way here. I smiled politely, though my fingers itched. Builder, actually. He laughed. Cute. Same difference. Vermont's finest. He clapped me on the back like he expected I'd thank him for the insult. I took another sip of my water and walked away without a word. I made it maybe 20 feet before someone else approached a woman in a sequined shawl and towering heels, clearly a friend of the family. She waved her fingers delicately in my direction. Sweetheart, would you mind letting the kitchen know we're low on lobster puffs? They seem to be ignoring our side of the room. I blinked. She thought I worked here. Before I could respond, Bryce's voice broke in like a dagger wrapped in velvet. Oh, she's not staff. She's just blending in. You know, budget chic. The woman's eyes widened. Oh, my mistake. No harm done, I murmured. Bryce chuckled. Sienna here's part of the family, the distant part. Vermont chapter. Leela, his sister, glided over with a wine glass and a perfect smile. We're so glad you made it. It's always charming to see someone break the dress code. It's not a costume party, I said. Didn't think sequins were required. Not required, Lila said, tilting her head just expected. Like conformity, I said, locking eyes with her. Her smile didn't waver, but her pupils sharpened. Bryce cut in before she could fire back. So, Sienna, tell us, what do you think of the Bellevue project? Or is that too? Big city. I nodded towards the glowing model at the center of the room. I think the proposed demolition's a mistake. There's history in that brick, and more value in restoration than people realize. He burst out laughing. Oh my God, are you serious? Are we doing the save the warehouse bit again? Lila snorted. Don't tell me you're here to pitch some kind of artist co-op. I held my ground. I'm here because I have a plan for Bellevue that doesn't involve flattening a community for another overpriced tower. A plan. Bryce grinned. Does it involve fairy dust and goodwill? It involves math, zoning, sustainability, return on investment, and people who live there. Dean wobbled over again, raising a glass. A toast to Sienna, the mechanics' kid savior of jazz clubs and brick walls. Chuckles spread through the group. I stood still, not blinking. Let them laugh. Let them drink and mispronounce power. They thought I was here for validation. They didn't know I already had the owner's letter, the investors' backing, the city's ear. They could mock the surface, but they didn't realize the foundation had already shifted. By the time they sobered up, they'd learn one thing the hard way. It's always the quiet ones who carry the real blueprints. The lock clicked behind me and I leaned against the door of my hotel room, letting the quiet settle over my skin like balm. The buzz of cocktail hour still rang faintly in my ears, laughter laced with venom-polished voices spitting backhanded compliments. But here in this small room with its plain walls and muted carpet, I was finally back on my ground. I shrugged off the blazer, tossed my shoes into the corner, and crossed to the desk where my old black suitcase sat waiting. It wasn't pretty, but it carried everything that mattered. I unzipped it and pulled out the blueprint tube first, placing it gently on the bed. Then the thick folder creased at the spine and secured with an elastic band. Inside, it lived the heart of my plan, a redevelopment proposal that I had drafted, redrafted, and reimagined until every line made sense and every number told a story. I spread the documents out across the bed like pieces of a puzzle, architectural sketches of Bellevue's existing structure, overlays showing unit divisions, energy-efficient retrofitting diagrams, and phased construction schedules. Nothing glossy, just clarity. At the center of it all sat the investor agreement signed by Malcolm Lynn, one of the most forward-thinking backers I'd ever pitched to. He wasn't just funding the vision. He believed in the why behind it. Community over cash grab, legacy over leverage. Malcolm had looked me in the eye and said, "You're not building a building. You're building proof that decency and design can coexist. Let's show them." He wasn't wrong. This plan didn't come together overnight. It was the result of months of meetings in cramped neighborhood kitchens, coffee shops where I bought more rounds of pastries than I could count, and city council sessions that stretched into the night. I had sat across from old women who remembered when Bellevue was still a garment factory. I listened to a single mother who ran the daycare on the corner. I stood in the jazz club basement while a trumpet player taught kids how to improvise and promised I'd fight to keep his lease alive. I hadn't come to Boston with theory. I came with numbers, with names, with a layered strategy rooted in place, not profit alone. The plan preserved the building's original structure, restoring its faded brick, reinforcing its historic trusses, and converting the upper floors into a mix of affordable and market-rate housing. The first floor would be reserved for small business vendors and non-profit offices. The rooftop a shared garden and performance space. Green certified, community managed. The city planning office had already given its tentative blessing enough to secure the preliminary grant, paperwork sitting under my blueprints. A 10-day processing window remained. But the moment Bellevue's title changed hands, it would all move forward. That was the other document. I pulled out a conditional letter of sale from Eleanor McClellan Bellevue's current owner. Dated, notarized, her signature below mine. The deal was binding, set to close in 48 hours, unless someone beat my terms with cash in full and a competing city-backed plan. Good luck. I exhaled slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. They didn't see it coming. They didn't think the girl from Vermont, the so-called mechanics kid, could outmaneuver them. But what they never understood is that I didn't need to outshine them. I just needed to outwork them, and I had. Quietly, thoroughly. The family would wake up tomorrow expecting another Langford conquest. Instead, they'd realize Bellevue wasn't theirs to take. It was mine. And soon, it would belong to everyone they'd tried to ignore. I smiled to myself, not for revenge, but for resilience. I hadn't come this far to argue over cocktail shrimp and mockery. I'd come to build something that mattered, and I had all the blueprints I needed. The Langford conference room was colder than I remembered. Chrome chairs, high windows, and that enormous black table that stretched longer than some of the streets I'd worked on. Breakfast had been laid out in crisp rows, pastries no one touched, pressed orange juice coffee that smelled like intimidation. I walked in precisely at 8:00 a.m., dressed in tailored gray slacks and a soft cream blouse. Simple, sharp, no flash, just focus. The room was already half full. Uncle Richard, Aunt Eleanor, Bryce, Lila, and a few family advisors I didn't recognize. Stuart sat at the head of the table, flipping through his tablet. He barely looked up. "We'll begin in 5, he muttered. I waited until everyone had arrived. I didn't ask for permission. I waited for the opening I knew would come. As they discussed a quarterly report from the West End project, I slid my folder onto the table and cleared my throat. I'd like 10 minutes. Chairs stilled, eyes turned. 10 minutes, I repeated, to present an alternative proposal for the Bellevue property. A pause, then laughter, muted, awkward, mostly from Bryce. "You're joking," he said. "I'm not," I replied, my tone even. "It won't take more than 10. Stuart sighed but gestured toward the screen at the end of the room. "You have 5. I stepped forward, plugged in my drive, and clicked open the first slide. No flashy transitions, just clean renderings of Bellevue's existing structure and the vision layered over it. "This is what I'm proposing," I said. "Preservation of the building's original facade. 45 mixed-income housing units, half affordable, 10 dedicated to rent-to-own pilot programs. Ground-level retail for small local businesses. A rooftop event and garden space co-managed by a nonprofit arts collective." Lila raised a brow. "So, charity housing and farmers markets?" "No," I said. "Sustainable multi-use development that meets the city's equity goals. revitalizes the neighborhood, and honors the building's history without displacement. The next slide displayed the numbers. Projected ROI, estimated tax credit returns. Long-term valuation increase based on similar preservation-first projects in Brooklyn and Philadelphia. I kept my voice level. No performance, just data. I've already met with the Office of Community Renewal. They've offered a conditional grant. I've secured financing from Malcolm Lynn and a letter of support from the city's zoning board. The owner, Eleanor McClellan, has signed a conditional sale. I have 48 hours to close. Bryce leaned forward, mouth slightly open. You have what I passed the folder down the table. Everything you need to verify it. As they flipped through, Stuart stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You've been working this behind our backs. I've been working it, I said, because Bellevue deserves better than glass towers and tenant evictions. The room was quiet, except for the soft rustle of paper. I spoke to the bakery owner on the corner. She's been on that block for 26 years. I told her she wouldn't lose her shop. Who cares about bakeries, Bryce muttered. People who live there, I said. People who vote. And cities who are done rubber stamping your blueprints. I clicked to the final slide, an aerial rendering of the completed project. Soft lights, open markets, children on the rooftop garden, music notes painted on the alley where the jazz club's back entrance opened. I'm not asking for family support, I finished. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something that actually makes a difference. Silence hung like fog. Then Stuart looked down at the folder again, jaw tight. You did all this alone, I met his eyes. Not alone. With the community you ignored. 10 minutes were up. I unplugged my drive and returned to my seat, heart calm. They'd spent years pretending I wasn't at the table. Now I owned it. Stuart's silence didn't last long. His voice sharp and clipped, sliced through the tension like a dull blade. So this was the plan, he said. Humiliate your own family. Drag this sideshow into our boardroom to make a point. I didn't flinch. I'm here to present a better alternative. Nothing about this is a sideshow. Don't insult our intelligence, he snapped. You waited until the gala. You waited until cameras were rolling. You waited until we were too far in to react. I tilted my head. Or maybe I waited until I knew you couldn't brush me off. Lila let out a dry chuckle. Well, mission accomplished. You certainly surprised us. Cute charity, Bryce chimed in, flipping through the folder with mock admiration. Mixed income housing, rooftop art classes, jazz clubs. What's next? A soup kitchen in the penthouse. He looked at the others as if waiting for applause. No one laughed. You think this makes you look like some hero, he added. You're playing small ball while we're here making legacy plays. I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket and tapped the screen once. I didn't come for legacy, I said. I came with legitimacy. The voicemail played on speaker, clear and confident. Hi, Sienna, this is Jordan Kelly from the city's Office of Planning and Development. Just following up on our meeting, your proposal for Bellevue has been pre-approved on our end. We're impressed with the community-first approach, and we'd like to highlight it in the next planning summit. We'll be drafting our letter of recommendation this week. Congratulations again. I let it play through. The last word echoed into silence. Stuart stared. Lila's expression soured. Bryce shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Pre-approved Stuart asked, voice flat. I nodded. Zoning board too. Pending final paperwork and closing. Closing on what? I pulled the signed letter of sale from the folder and placed it directly in front of him. Bellevue. I have a contract with Eleanor McClellan. 48-hour window to close. He looked down at the signature, his own jaw working like he'd bitten down on a stone. You did this behind our backs? No, I said. I did it while you were looking through me. Bryce scoffed, but he wasn't smiling anymore. You went to the press, Lila asked suddenly. No, but the press will come, I said. Once the city announces its support and the deal closes, then we'll counter it, Stewart muttered. We'll buy you out. You can't. I sat back calm as ever. The contract's exclusive. No offers will be entertained unless I default. You've got nothing to counter. They weren't used to losing. They especially weren't used to losing to me. You always thought I'd come back begging for a piece of the Langford name, I said. But what you never understood is I never needed it. I needed space to build something real. Stewart pushed the folder aside. This isn't how things are done in this family. Exactly, I said. That's the problem. I stood slowly gathering my things as the room sat stunned. The offer stands, I added. Not for control, for collaboration, but I won't wait for your approval. Bryce's voice was bitter behind me. You're walking out like you've won something. I turned back once, just long enough to hold his eyes. I already did. Then I walked out, leaving them in a silence they didn't know how to fill. They'd built towers, sure, but I just built a foundation they never saw coming. The manila folder made a soft slap as I placed it on the table and slid it across to Stewart. The full purchase option contract, I said. Signed by Eleanor McClellan 3 weeks ago. It gives me exclusive rights to the Bellevue property, 48 hours left to close. Stewart's fingers hesitated at the edge of the folder like he wasn't sure he wanted to see what was inside, but he opened it anyway. The others leaned in as he flipped through the pages. Each sheet detailed my bid, the financing structure, renovation timeline, projected returns. Clean, legal, sealed. Bryce leaned over his father's shoulder and squinted at the numbers. You offered above market. His tone was incredulous. I offered what it was worth with future value, not just immediate gain. Leila took the folder next. Her face was stone as she scanned the pages. Eleanor McClellan actually signed this. I nodded. We walked the property together. She's passionate about preservation and she's tired of being courted by people who don't even step inside the building. A sharp inhale came from the end of the table. I turned. Aunt Eleanor. She hadn't said a word the entire meeting. Not when I laid out the project. Not when Bryce made his smug remarks. But now she was studying the signature on the contract. Her lips parted slightly. I told your mother, she said, voice low but deliberate, that she would never belong. That Langfords don't walk away from legacy and expect to return. My pulse steadied. She didn't walk away. She was pushed. Eleanor didn't argue. She just looked at the folder again. And you've done all this without a dime from us, yes, because I didn't need your money to build something meaningful. The silence in the room changed shape, then less disbelief, more discomfort. They were used to operating from a place of control, and I had just removed their leverage. Bryce let out a weak laugh. You outbid us, got pre-approval from the city, and signed the seller without even talking to us. I met his eyes. Why would I Lila toss the folder back onto the table? You think this is some kind of victory lap? You don't understand what it takes to run projects like this. The political red tape alone, I've already cleared it, I said. Ask Jordan Kelly at City Planning, ask Malcolm Lynn, ask anyone I've worked with. I'm not some starry-eyed dreamer, I'm a developer, just not the kind you're used to. Eleanor folded her hands, watching me now, with something closer to recognition than disdain. Maybe even curiosity. But I didn't need her approval, not anymore. I came here, I continued, because I believe Bellevue can be more than another trophy property. I believe it can be a model for how redevelopment should work, and I wanted to give you the chance to be part of that, not because I need you, but because I was raised to believe that even people who get it wrong deserve the chance to make it right. Leila scoffed quietly, but she didn't interrupt. I don't expect you to understand the math behind community wealth, or the value in long-term returns that include human outcomes, but the numbers are there. The plan is solid, and the window is closing. Stuart closed the folder and rested both hands on it. "You're asking us to let this go?" "I'm not asking," I said. "I'm informing you. You have 48 hours to match the deal in full, or Bellevue is mine." I let the weight of those words settle before I picked up my bag. I paused at the door just long enough to look back at Aunt Eleanor. "I didn't come back to belong," I said. "I came back to build." Then I left them sitting in their silence. For once, they weren't the ones holding the future. I was. I didn't wait for them to speak. Not Bryce, with another lazy insult. Not Leila, with her thinly veiled contempt. And certainly not Stuart, with a lecture about tradition. I simply gathered my folder, gave one last glance to the blueprint they'd all dismissed just 24 hours ago, and walked out of the Langford boardroom. Silence followed me, thick, unsettled, honest. It wasn't the silence of victory exactly. It was the sound of foundations shifting beneath people who had never been questioned, only obeyed. That's what shook them, not my words, not even the deal. It was the realization that they had underestimated me, that everything they thought they knew about Miriam's daughter was wrong. In their minds, I'd always been the girl from the garage, the Langford offshoot who never quite fit the mold. Raised in boots and sawdust, not boarding schools and boardrooms. To them, I was background noise in a story that had already been written. But the truth was simple. I wasn't background. I was the next chapter. I stepped into the hallway, letting the glass door close gently behind me. No slamming, no dramatics, just the deliberate click of control being claimed, not gifted. The morning sun poured through the east windows, casting light across the marble. I kept walking. I didn't look back. Not even when I heard Stuart say my name softly, almost like a man trying to speak a language he never bothered to learn. Outside, the city felt different. Not bigger, not louder. Just mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I reached the sidewalk. I pulled it out, a text from Malcolm Lynn. "All good," I smiled. "Better. It's done." As I slid the phone away, I spotted my reflection in the building's glass. No longer the woman trying to prove something, but the one who already had. The contract was mine. Bellevue was mine. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an echo of someone else's name. I felt like exactly who I'd become. The Langfords would scramble now, of course. Probably try to counter-offer pressure Eleanor pulls strings, but it wouldn't matter. They didn't have the community, the city, or the credibility. They had missed the moment, and I'd captured it. My steps were light as I crossed the street. The coffee shop on the corner was just opening, the smell of roasted beans drifting through the cool air. I walked in, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window. For a long moment, I just watched the morning unfold. Construction crews setting up barriers, a jogger with a golden retriever, a teenager waiting for a late bus. This was the city I came to rebuild, not just in form, but in spirit. Back at the boardroom, they'd start spinning narratives. They'd argue over strategy and blame each other for letting the stray get the better hand. But they wouldn't understand what had really happened. It wasn't a trick or a gamble. It was the result of planning, listening, building, not buildings, but trust. I hadn't chased power. I'd earned it, brick by brick, voice by voice. And in the end, the Langfords hadn't lost to me because I was better. They lost because they never looked close enough to realize I was building something they didn't even know they should want. A legacy rooted not in entitlement, but in purpose. I sipped my coffee, let it burn a little on the way down, and smiled. Let them call me the girl from the garage. They just never realized that's where all the real work gets done. The wind at Bellevue smelled different now, like fresh wood paint and the steady rhythm of new life unfolding. The scaffolding was nearly down. Where cracked windows once blinked back at the city like tired eyes, now stood frames filled with light and energy. Laughter echoed from the rooftop garden, and the sidewalk buzzed with the sounds of possibility. I stood at the edge of the construction zone, denim jeans stained with dust, steel-toed boots planted firm on the ground, and a tablet in my hand. The screen showed blueprints for the last phase of the build-out, just final electrical checks and finishing the murals in the community corridor. We were on track, maybe even ahead of schedule. 6 months ago, this place was a punchline. Now it was a pulse. The food co-op on the ground floor had already hosted its first neighborhood event, a cooking workshop taught by local elders. Upstairs, the artist lofts were humming with creativity, the exposed brick walls now home to canvases, sketch pads, and shared dreams. The old jazz club reopened with a crowd so large we had to move people to the garden patio, and the tech lab full every afternoon with teens learning code, soldering wires, and building robots from donated parts. It was real, alive, and entirely different from the polished renderings the Langfords had once pitched. They still hadn't responded publicly to my project, but privately the messages started to come. Bryce through a shared investor, impressive numbers, would love to talk if you're open. I deleted it without blinking. Stuart via courier, a flower arrangement with white orchids and a note, let's meet. I was wrong. I didn't respond. I didn't need their words. I had my work, but I wasn't alone. That was the difference. Every name etched into the community wall in the entryway was someone who'd made this happen. Artists, tenants, volunteers, planners. This wasn't my empire. It was a shared effort, a layered, breathing, inclusive foundation. A legacy, yes, but not the kind you inherit, the kind you choose to build. One afternoon I was walking past the West Wing when a young woman stood hesitating by the portable fencing. She was holding a worn messenger bag and a roll of plans sticking out the top. "Can I help you?" I asked. She turned, maybe 22. Short black curls, smudged glasses, and a notebook clutched to her chest like armor. I'm Eliza," she said. "I applied for the junior architect mentorship. I know I'm early, I just wanted to see the space." I smiled. "You're not early. You're right on time." I brought her inside, gave her a tour of the finished wings, showed her where the next project was unfolding, an open access design lab for community builders. When we reached the draft table near the east corner, I handed her a blueprint folder. "This," I said, "is yours now." She looked at me, eyes wide. "Wait. Seriously?" "Seriously," I said. "We all get one shot. This is yours. Build something worth staying for." Her hands trembled just like mine did the first time someone trusted me with real tools, real decisions, real space. And I saw it then clearer than ever. I didn't just want to reclaim my family's name. I wanted to rewrite what legacy could mean. I didn't need a Langford empire. I needed impact. I needed to know that when people looked at my work, they didn't see a last name on a brass plaque. They saw a heartbeat in every wall, a purpose in every window. I turned back toward the site as Eliza opened her folder and began to sketch. That was it. That was the victory. Sienna Langford didn't need the name. She made it mean something.